Is intermittent fasting good or bad for women's hormones, and which regimes might be doing more harm than others? Today we're going to dive deep into the science behind intermittent fasting and what impact might it have on women's hormonal health and fertility. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Clementina and I do health and wellness content here on YouTube. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in nutritional sciences and a master's degree in food chemistry recently, and today we're going to be analyzing the science behind intermittent fasting and women's hormonal health. For those of you who are not familiar, intermittent fasting is an eating pattern, it's not a diet, and it relates to eating at designated times or at specific days in the week. There are different ways to approach this. Some people practice alternate day fasting. An example of this would be eating for 5 days a week and then for 2 days in this week just having a water fast. Other ways are modified alternate day fasting, where you eat for 3 to 5 days a week a very low amount of calories, so between 0 and 600 calories, and for the other days you eat unrestricted. The most important approach, however, is just time restricted fasting, time restricted eating, and that relates to eating for specific hours in the day. It's called the eating window, and not eating for the rest of the day. A very popular approach to this would be 16-8, and it's also one of the most easily applicable compared to 20 and 4. And 16-8 means that you would be eating in an 8-hour window and you would be having a water fast for the remaining 16 hours of the day. Over the past years, numerous studies, clinical trials have emphasized the benefits of intermittent fasting on people's health. It has been found to be a really effective approach for managing obesity, since most studies find that implementing some kind of intermittent fasting regime leads to a reduction in body weight, improves insulin sensitivity, also improved blood lipids levels, higher good cholesterol and lower bad cholesterol. Additionally, a reduction in fat mass has been observed, along with the reductions in blood pressure in some studies. A smaller number of studies also suggest that intermittent fasting could have a positive impact on depressive symptoms through an improvement in the neuroplasticity, an improved cellular repair, and better hormonal regulation. Recently, more and more concerns have been raised regarding the impacts of intermittent fasting on women's hormonal health. Some women are hesitant to start intermittent fasting because they believe that it could negatively impact their fertility and their menstrual cycle. Intermittent fasting regimes have been proposed to influence the levels of the different sexual related hormones in one's body, such as estrogen. One reason for these suggestions is a very popular study from 2013 by Kumar et al., which investigated the impact of 24th hour of water fasting every other day for 12 weeks. However, on rodents, those were 3-month-old rats. By the end of the trial, negative changes in the regularity of the menstrual cycle were observed, along with alterations in some hormones, a reduction in the luteinizing hormone levels, and an increase in the serum estradiol levels. Estradiol is another version of estrogen circulating in your body. There are different versions of estrogen. It's a larger group of compounds. The luteinizing hormone is one of the hormones that are responsible from releasing the egg from the ovaries, or for the ovulation process. As already mentioned, these rats were very young, they were 3 months old, which according to the researchers from this study corresponds to a human age of 9 years old. And intermittent fasting is generally not recommended for children under the 12 years of age. It could have a negative impact on puberty and the development of the child. Therefore, although this study provides important insights into the impact of intermittent fasting, this does not mean that it would have the same impact on adult females. An important thing to note is that when calorie intake is low, so let's say you're performing intermittent fasting but you're also therefore skipping a meal, let's say you're just skipping breakfast altogether because your fast starts later on in the day, the hypothalamus is affected, and that affects the secretion of one hormone. This is called gonadotropin releasing hormone, which then impacts 2 other hormones that are the luteinizing hormone that I just mentioned, along with the follicle stimulating hormone, and they together together impact ovulation. Estrogen is the main female reproductive hormone that is responsible for the development and maintenance of female reproductive tissues and the regulation of the menstrual cycle. Higher estrogen levels are actually observed in women that are suffering from obesity. Estrogen levels are also associated with polycystic ovarian syndrome, so PCOS, and this hormone is elevated in individuals suffering from that. Higher levels of estrogen have also been associated with an increased breast cancer risks and also anovulation, so just skipping ovulation altogether. Weight loss interventions have been proved themselves to be reducing estrogen levels in obese and overweight individuals. One study on the topic of fasting investigated the impact of different time eating windows on women with polycystic ovarian syndrome. The one group of women had to eat over 50% of their daily calories at breakfast, while for the second group they had to eat the same amounts at dinner, so they would have an eating window that is shifted towards the end of the day. This study had a very interesting finding, and that was estrogen levels after the 12-week intervention were elevated in the women that had to eat all of their calories at dinner. Timing your eating windows when you're fasting actually matters, because this is a very large amount of calories. This is not a normal amount of calories that you would have if you did not have these eating windows and you were having your meals more spread out throughout the day. The women that were eating their calories in the beginning of the day did not have elevated estrogen levels. Generally, excess estrogen is also one of the main causes of the polycystic ovarian syndrome, since it disrupts the HBG axis, which regulates a number of sex hormones in a woman's body and also in the man's body. These changes were also observed without any changes in body weight, but changes in their hormonal levels were still observed. Now we're moving on to other hormones that are important for polycystic ovarian syndrome and generally for women's health, and those are the androgens. Think testosterone, also androstenedione, and other androgens. Hyperandrogenism, so the higher concentrations of these hormones in the woman's body, are associated with symptoms such as excessive hair growth on the body, androgenetic alopecia, so this kind of male pattern, baldness, also seborrhea, so these are scaly patches on a woman's scalp, disorders in the menstrual cycle. There are different studies investigating the impact of different types of fasting regimes on androgen levels. One study applied an 8-hour time restrictive window, so it was between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. for 5 weeks in women with polycystic ovarian syndrome. They had a decrease in body weight by 2% and androgen testosterone levels decreased significantly. A similar thing was observed in the other study that I explained regarding estrogen, when the two groups were consuming over 50% of their calories either in the morning or at dinner time, and decreased levels of androgens and testosterone more specifically were observed only in the group that had their eating window shifted earlier in the day. I also forgot to mention that in the study that I previously explained, they were eating all of their energy needs in that time window, so there was no meal skipping happening between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. With the decreasing levels of androgens in these studies, what also was observed was an improvement in inflammation markers along with reduced insulin resistance. Sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG, is a glycoprotein that is responsible for transporting your hormones to the it's supposed to exert its function into. So it modulates the bioavailability of the hormones in your circulation. Studies suggest that lower levels of this SHBG are actually associated with an increase in the incidence for insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, regardless of the concentration of the hormones in circulation. One of the things that could regulate the levels of this glycoprotein is again weight loss, and such interventions would increase the level levels of SHBG in overweight and obese women. One study investigated the impact of a 5-2 alternate day fasting regime on premenopausal women with obesity, and this study found that the levels of SHBG decreased in that group along with the 7% reduction in their body weight. The other studies that also investigated the impacts of fasting regimes on these levels are the one that I already mentioned for the other hormones in the intervention, where they had 8-hour time restricted eating window. The same effect was observed. The levels of this glycoprotein increased. The other study that I explained, where there were the two groups of PCOS patients, one eating more at breakfast and one more at dinner, the positive impacts on the levels of this SHBG were observed only in the breakfast group but not in the dinner group, again indicating that timing really matters. Another thing that could have an impact on sex hormones in general is the gut microbiome. Fasting has been observed to have an impact on your gut microbiome. Specific bacteria can still utilize during these fasting periods what is available in your gut at the time and produce some substances that have a very positive impact on your health overall, such as short-chain fatty acids like acetates and butyrate. I have a whole video on gut health where I talk more about these things. Another suggestions by researchers is improvement in the alignment of your hormones with the circadian rhythm. By shortening the eating window, you're aligning your hormone production better with circadian biology. I did not find any strong evidence on that. It has just been a proposed theory, so there is not enough scientific evidence to back these suggestions. The evidence in general on intermittent fasting and women's health is very limited, and more research is definitely required in order for us to gain a better understanding of the exact influence intermittent fasting has. Also, none of the studies mentioned progesterone, which is a very important factor later on when women reach their perimenopausal and postmenopausal ages. And studies that investigate its impact on these hormones would be very beneficial for us to understand if intermittent fasting might be very important to implement for these age groups or if they should not undergo such interventions at all. And on a final note, I want to mention a few things that are generally related to hormonal regulation. I believe that a lot of the people that preach that intermittent fasting is bad for women's hormones are not only motivated by the studies, such as the one study with the 3-month-old rats, but also intermittent fasting is in a way for some people very restrictive. It could cause you psychologically a lot of stress. It limits your social life in a way if this eating window is shifted towards the first half of the day. This could lead to generally an increased stress, which negatively impacts your hormones. This is kind of an indirect effect of intermittent fasting on hormonal levels. It's not a direct correlation. Other thing to consider is eating disorder history. Intermittent fasting in a way could provide you freedom if you have an eating disorder history. You do not have any restrictions around foods technically. You can only eat in this window and that's it. There are no other rules around it, which I find to be very liberating if you have a bad experience with restrictive eating. Other thing to keep in mind is that you need to be getting a sufficient amount of calories in this time eating window, because as I already explained, a very drastic reduction in calories can have a negative impact on your hormonal levels, your menstrual cycle and your fertility. This is why you need to be making sure that you're not skipping meals and that you're still getting the calories that you're supposed to get throughout the day. Excessive caloric restriction generally has a lot of negative impacts on your body that also relate not only to your fertility but your metabolism and other aspects. Some tips if you're a woman and you're considering if you should start intermittent fasting or not is to watch at first your caloric intake, what I just mentioned. Make sure that you're getting a sufficient amount of calories for you not to experience the negative effects of calorie restriction. A second thing is to reconsider if intermittent fasting will not cause you excessive amounts of stress. Is this method applicable to your lifestyle, since when you're performing a fast, a water fast, then you're not really allowed to have anything during that period. No drinks, no food, coffee technically and tea can be had, but they have to be without any sugar or creamers or honey, anything. If you decide to start intermittent fasting, as already science-backed by the studies, eating window that is set earlier in the day would be more beneficial for you in terms of improving your hormonal health, especially if you have some existing problems with polycystic ovarian syndrome. This approach you might find very beneficial, since there have already been studies that prove that it can have positive effects on hormone regulation. I've done intermittent fasting myself as well when I was younger, and a personal observation of mine is that it helped my digestion a lot. So eating my calories earlier in the day and stopping to eat around, let's say, 7 p.m. really benefited my gut motility and overall my digestive processes. I do not know if there is some science behind this, it's just my personal experience. On the topic of weight loss, that was not my primary goal. I just wanted to see if this diet really contributed with anything to my overall health, so I could not give you any information on that. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you learned something new today. Let me know down in the comments if there is something that you would like me to cover next, and I will be seeing you next time.